Well, tonight we shift our focus to a seismic geopolitical shift, the rising prominence of India and the broader global south. In the last decade, India has emerged not just as an economic powerhouse, but as a strategic player on the world stage, with a GDP growth rate that outpaces many developed nations. India's digital revolution, space prowess, and our pharma industries are making headlines around the world. But it's not just about economics or our cultural exports through Bollywood, yoga, or our vast diaspora, which are influencing global culture like never before. Parallel to India's rise is the rise of the global south, and that encompasses Africa, Latin America, parts of Asia. They're all part of redefining our role in this. These regions are leveraging their demographic dividends, natural resources, and increasing tech adoption to stake a larger stake in global affairs. From climate initiatives in Brazil to tech hubs in Nairobi, the global south is no longer just at the receiving end of global policy, but is actively shaping it. We've got Amitabh Kant with us, the Sherpa of India Sherpa at the G20, former Niti Aayog CEO. Thanks very much, Dr. Kant, very much for being with us. When we use the words India century, what does that imply?
Well, it implies that India is the only country in the world which is today the fifth largest economy, which in the next 2.5 years will be the third largest economy in the world, growing at about 8.2% last year. But it's the only country which is today making about 35 kilometers of road and 12 kilometers of railway lines per day, which does about 50% of the real-time fast payments in the world, which has done 31x of solar generation in the last 7 years, which is actually, if you look at it in terms of airport construction, makes about close to 9 airports and about 3 metros a year. Nowhere else in the world is this happening. The population scale impact at low prices, what India is doing, it's truly India's, not merely India's decade, but India's century, because the demographics are very young. The rest of the world is aging, but India is getting very, very young and will keep getting young.
In fact, that's my next question. In terms of India's demographic dividend, that's probably the biggest benefit that we have. The numbers we have are that 65% of our population is under 35 years of age. And that's wonderful, because that means there's a real future if we are able to employ them and if we are able to skill them appropriately. So as we talk about demographic dividend, how important is it for us to talk about reskilling?
That's the most important issue, Vishnu, because India can't grow only on the back of services. India needs to become a manufacturing nation. 17.5% of your GDP comes from manufacturing. You need to take it to 25%. You need to urbanize, because 500 million people are going to get into the process of urbanization. In the next 5 decades, that means India's challenge is to create 2 Americas in the next 5 decades. You need to enhance your agriculture productivity. The number of people dependent on agriculture at close to 45% is very, very high. So you need to fire on all cylinders: services, manufacturing, urbanization, agriculture, all of them. And for manufacturing and urbanization, you need to provide skills. You need to get them into completely new areas of growth: artificial intelligence, machine learning, quantum computing. And that's why India has rolled out these new missions in all these areas, including a mission for semiconductors and a mission for green hydrogen. All this is critical for India.
We'll talk about these missions because they're absolutely essential to this conversation. But it just strikes me that when we speak about Atmanirbharta in India, it doesn't necessarily have to be just a stereotype or a cliche or another way of saying make in India. It's qualitatively different for a couple of reasons, and one which we don't talk about is that today in manufacturing, we can talk about the defense sector. We had Baba Kalyani here yesterday. We are making in India, but we are also making for the world. Not only are we making for the world, we are able to produce items, whether it is pharma, whether it is defense items, to the same standard at a cost-effective price and as well as anybody in the world. So Atmanirbharta isn't just about India, it's about India and the world.
So when we talk about Atmanirbharta, it's about being an integral part of global value chains. You can't grow at rates of 9 to 10% per annum, year after year, for 3 decades or more. That's what you need to do. So we must understand that when we're talking about becoming a Vixit Bharat, we are talking about becoming a $30 trillion economy in 2047. Growing from 4 trillion to 30 trillion means that your GDP has to grow 9 times. Mm-hmm. Your per capita income has to grow 8 times. And your manufacturing has to grow 16 times. That's the challenge. And I think for overcoming that challenge, India needs to really become a very integral part of value chains and penetrate global value chains. You know, you need to export in a very big way. And that's why this big thrust on production-linked incentive scheme, which India has done, that is, you grow big, bigger, biggest, and then, because you need 10,000 large manufacturing companies here to penetrate global markets, and you need size and scale of manufacturing to penetrate, and you need 12 states, 12 Indian states to grow at 10% plus, and that has to happen. So you need ambition and hunger in states to grow rapidly, and you need large companies to penetrate global markets. That's the challenge.
Let's talk about the semiconductor mission, because one of the key focal points in that is we must have resilient supply chains. Yeah. We cannot just depend on Taiwan. We cannot just depend on Japan or ensure that China has a dominance in high-tech manufacture in certain areas. If we are to realize our potential in semiconductor manufacture in India, how will that translate into growth for the Indian economy?
So, Vishnu, let me first tell you that, the global supply chains across the world are badly disrupted. They're disrupted because the United States has just imposed 100% duty on imports from China on electric vehicles. It's imposed 50% duty on batteries, on solar imports. It has imposed this because it says, and rightly so, it says that China subsidizes manufacturing, government supports it, and therefore they're doing extra production to penetrate global markets, and that is why China is controlling 70% of the EV market, it's controlling 75% of the solar market, it's controlling about 74% of the battery market, and therefore we must put an end to this oversupply in the global markets. But US is also responsible for outsourcing all its manufacturing to China in the last 3-4 decades. And therefore, global supply chains are disrupted. And you should read a book by a guy called Chris Miller on the chips war. And what it says is, if China was to annex Taiwan tomorrow, then it'll control automobiles, it'll control batteries, it'll control defense, it'll control aerospace, because the whole world will be running on chips. And that's why, for countries to become totally dependent on chip manufacturing from abroad is a dangerous proposition. And therefore, India must create its own ecosystem, because we are a very large consumer of vehicles, we are a very large consumer of mobiles. Every Indian has a smartphone. You need chips for that. And that's why one of the most dynamic measures the government has taken is to roll out the semiconductor mission of 76,000 crores, both in terms of design, in terms of fab, in terms of fabless, and in terms of chip manufacturing. And that, to my mind, will be transformational in the days to come.
When we talk about India's digital future, you can look at it in dozens of different ways. Digital commerce, ease of living, etc., etc. I want to firstly focus on 6G being a reality around the world and in India in a finite amount of time. How will the induction or the introduction of 6G technology and greater bandwidth available to all telecom manufacturers translate into a new reality for us, which will again help us economically?
No, so that's critical because we were late in 2G, 3G, 4G. We just about caught up in 5G, and we should be ahead of the rest of the world in 6G. Why it's important is because India's model of digitization is very different from the rest of the world. If you look at the western part of the world, most technological innovation have been carried out by big tech. It's Google, it's Meta, it's Apple, it's Amazon. And in China, by Tencent and Alibaba. What India has done differently is that it created the digital identity layer, and on top of which you allowed private sector to compete. So Paytm competes with Amazon Pay, Phone Pay competes with Google Pay. Everybody's competing in the marketplace. So we created what we call as open source, as open API, globally interoperable model. And during G20, the world said that this is the model to be followed because our data is held by individual citizens. Your data is controlled by you under the Digital Empowerment Protection Architecture, whereas in the West, all the data is controlled by Google and by Meta, and in China by Tencent and Alibaba. And therefore, the ownership of the data is with you, and that, to my mind, is going to be the future of the world. And open source will be the future of the world. Now, when 6G comes in, it'll enable you to do much more work, much rapid work on urbanization, on water supply, on improving, all this talk of AI is all about large language models right now. Every day, a new large language models. But AI should impact the lives of the citizens. So you need AI for improving learning outcomes, for improving health outcomes. You need it for improving nutritional standards. That's what AI should be used to create a better society and to improve the quality of life of citizens and to improve human development, not to create just large language models which can be in conflict tomorrow because of the ethics and because of the assumptions on which they are based. And therefore, it's very critical that we divert AI for transforming lives of citizens.
Will AI take jobs?
Well, AI will bring in new kinds of jobs. AI will bring in completely new scales of jobs. AI is inevitable. Machine learning is inevitable. And therefore, we need to create many more skilled people in many of these areas. You need new data scientists, you need AI engineers, you need machine learning scientists, and that is what many of our IITs are doing today.
What is impressive and not really spoken about is the Indian AI story. The fact that you've got young software and other engineers working on an Indian AI model for an Indian requirement. Can you tell us about that?
So you have many young startups. You have the story of Sarvam. You have the story of Perplexity. All these are young Indian AI companies which are doing transformational work. And I think much like we have created a model of digital public infrastructure, which has been transformational. All this, nowhere in the world does it happen that 50% of the real-time fast payments happen in India. 51% of the fast payment happened in India. China was next with 22%. Nowhere in the world does this happen that 30% of the stock market is controlled by young startups. Nowhere in the world does this happen that you can get an insurance policy in 1 minute. When I was a young officer, it used to take me 7 months. So we do transactions from identity to credit to fast payments to insurance to stock market in 30 seconds to 1 minute on the mobile, on the go. And therefore, what you will see is a different scale of transformation on AI from India. And I think increasingly AI will be open sourced.
When we talk about the G20 process and digital inclusion, how has India offered not just our knowledge, but our actual digital governance models to nations of the G20? And how is that, the potential of that absolutely enormous? Let's talk about the global south now.
So the only way, in the next 4 decades, according to both IMF and World Bank, 3/4, and it's very important because I see a lot of young people here, 3/4 of the growth in the world is going to come from the global south. This year, if you look at it, IMF says that the global growth is going to be 3.2%. The developed countries' growth is going to be 1.8%. The developing countries' growth is going to be 4.4%. So in the coming years, all the growth is going to come from the global south. And it's going to come from global south because the demographics are young in India, Asia, and in Africa. The population is aging in America, the population is aging in Europe, but the population is extremely young in India and Africa, and therefore all the growth is going to come from here. Now, if all the growth is going to come from here, then you need the use of technology, you need the restructuring of financial institutions, both World Bank and IMF, the international financial architecture, which was designed for the post-World War II, has to be reconfigured for the global south. And that is what India is trying to do. And in the G20, India's key role, the Prime Minister Modi's key role, was to make African Union a member of G20 and make this into G21. That was his key role. He made it G21. And by doing this, he took the G20. G20 used to be just 76% of the global population. He took it to 90%, making it very inclusive.
India's space economy. We live in a times when we've got the Elon Musks of the world doing incredible work, let's face it. There is a lot of money to be made in space. There is genuine science to be followed. Do you believe that ISRO needs to grow faster and be more international in terms of commerce and its vision and its ambition?
No, I don't think, ISRO needs to just be a facilitator and a catalyst and allow the young startups of India to do all these launches, rocket launches, use the technology for ISRO has done its path-breaking work. But now it needs to allow a lot of all the launches, all the satellites from across the world must be launched from India. That should be the objective. Much like what many of Indian startups are doing today, India should really be India has done exceedingly well in the space sector. One of the great things India has done, the Prime Minister has done, is to open up the space sector, open up the drone sector, open up the geospatial sector, and all these sectors have been opened up for young startups to do path-breaking work.
We haven't focused on the clean energy transition. One of the big concerns is that we know the technology which is available and the fuels which are available, but we aren't quite at the right price point when it comes to green hydrogen, when it comes to other new forms as well. Even batteries have come down in cost, but perhaps not as much as we would like. So two questions. One, green hydrogen. Secondly, the cost of batteries coming down even further.
So Vishnu, India's the only G20 country which has achieved its Paris commitment 9 years ahead of schedule. It has done 200 gigawatt of renewables. It brought down the price of renewable from 24 rupees to 1 rupee 99 paisa. Then it bought 400 million LED bulbs and brought down the price to just 15% of the original price by the sheer size and scale of India. Then it went in for an electric bus tender for 6 cities, about 6,000 buses, and it demonstrated that actually electric buses can cost, the tender demonstrated that electric buses will be cheaper than combustion fuel buses, than the diesel buses. So what India did in all these cases was the size and scale to bring down, and many economists and Bill Gates also said that when you move from fossil fuel to clean fuel, the world has to pay a green premium. India demonstrated that you don't have to pay a green premium, use your size and scale of India, you can do it at a green discount. No other country has done it what India has done. And we import fossil fuel worth 180 billion. What the Prime Minister said is that by 2047, when India becomes 100, we should be an exporter of clean energy. That means use renewable. You're climatically blessed. You use renewables, crack water, produce green hydrogen, and become the largest exporter of green hydrogen, become the biggest exporter of green hydrogen, and become the largest manufacturer of electrolyzer. The cost of green hydrogen right now is $4.5 per kilogram. In America, because of weather condition, it is $7.5. So America subsidizes $3 extra. We don't have to do that much of subsidization because the climatic conditions are good. Our challenge is that from $4.5 by 2030, we'll bring it down to $1 per kilogram. Use the size and scale of India to bring it down from 4.5 to $1 to become the biggest producer and exporter of green nitrogen. That is what India will achieve.
One final question, and in a sense, it goes back to how we started, the India century. The India century can also be premised on fundamental problems which exist in the world today. Structural changes. If you look at the economy of the United Kingdom, the economy of Europe, if you look at the fact that there is a war which is raging, if you look at the fact that West Asia is in crisis, is this an opportunity for India?
So look around the world, you know, the three big challenges. Big power conflict is right center stage in Europe. Europe was responsible for World War I, Europe was responsible for World War II, and you are seeing a conflict there for the last 3 years. 45,000 people have died in Europe, 350,000 people have died in Middle East. Middle East is up in flames. And second, global value chains are disrupted. Third is the emergence of new force of artificial intelligence, machine learning, huge enhancement of production productivity, but you need international cooperation to have some pro-innovation regulations on that. To my mind, this is a huge, huge opportunity for India in all these three areas of growth. This is going to be not only India's decade, but this is going to be India's century.
Well, there you have it. You hear it from Amitabh Kant, passionate in everything that he speaks about, and he backs it up with a great deal of data. This is an incredible opportunity for India to actually make our mark. The fundamentals are there. They're staring us in the face. From space to clean energy transition to so many aspects of our economy that he's touched upon, and indeed premised on strong governance, can take India to a level which perhaps we can only, or we did once dream about. It can be a reality. As always, Amitabh Kant, a pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you very much, Vishnu.
Thank you.
It was a great pleasure.